Role-playing games. The name itself lends to complexity. It suggests that many different significant forces are all going to be working in tandem. Such complex battle systems are welcome by many fans of the genre, but too many things going on at once will create a very harrowing experience for anyone. Traditionally, game designers have then slowed down the time of games that use such systems. They've created abstract representations of battle scenes, where characters stand in place across from each other, taking turns to attack and do other actions. Turn-based systems used to be so common that you could easily just equate RPGs and turn-based combat, but as people experimented more and more with games, there seemed to be a pressure to make RPGs faster. There was a push to marry turn-based and real-time worlds to get the best of them both, which created a few good games, and a lot of messes. Let's take a look into some of these attempts and ask, is there a perfect hybrid? Can there be one? Before we answer that, we have to look at why designers wanted to move away from purely turn-based systems. One of the biggest drawbacks of traditionally turn-based games was how uninvolving they could be. In some series, the battles are all decided before you even enter them. When there's no real-time skill involved in battling, and there's no turn-to-turn strategizing other than spam your most powerful attack, the entire combat system is just a numbers game. Have you grinded enough? Have you gotten all characters every single best piece of equipment they could have in all 19 of their equipment slots? How's your strength stat? Your defense stat? What about left strength, magic, magic defense, constitution, vitality, intelligence, vigor, special, luck, potential, spirit, charisma, courage, faith, hygiene, friendliness, and general shittiness as a person? All equipment raises some of these and lowers some of these at complete random, and you have to judge what's the best combination for each character. Sounds like a problem a mathematician might try to solve, but you have to solve it before every single major area in the game. You get what you think is a good combination, then fight the same 3 groups of enemies for 2 hours on end to level up, and what is your reward? A boss fight where you select your most powerful attack 20 times in a row and heal when necessary. It doesn't matter how good the story or characters are. This kind of gameplay will not carry them forever. You need something more. A game designer at this point can take 2 solutions, or maybe a bit of both. Solution 1 is to make things not entirely turn-based, to add a time limit to each turn. The Final Fantasies did this with the ATB, essentially giving every action a loading bar instead of stopping time completely. However, this was not solving the problem entirely, as it was just taking that complicated, unengaging mess I just described and making it a little faster. Solution 2, which they also did, was to give players more things to think about between turns. They had different characters with vastly different abilities, and enemies and bosses of all kinds had widely varying tactics to fight against. This, on the other hand, is the #1 capability of turn-based combat. This is why it has a lot more value than some people think. Its natural ability to allow players more time for strategizing with a wider range of options. It can allow you to review a set of complicated choices and choose the best course of action, which if done right, is enormously satisfying. Think of the 1,000-Year Door, which encourages you to think about how you can defeat your opponents in the least amount of turns possible to minimize damage against yourself. No one tool fits every problem there. Your most powerful hammer attack won't hit a flying enemy, and your most powerful jump won't work on a spiked enemy. There's some 1 to 3 turn puzzle with every fight, and even though time pauses between turns, it is so fun to find the quick, simple solution to those puzzles. Additionally, with the real-time button presses that assist blocking and attacking, 1,000-Year Door is a turn-based RPG that feels fully like victory is decided within battles, rather than before them. There really isn't any grinding needed either, so you can just play through the game without having to make constant 2-hour pit stops. Chrono Cross has a similar draw, even though it can be somewhat complicated and overly difficult in some areas. The element wheel in battle is made of 3 sections, and each one has a different element. When an ability with an element is used, that element is moved into the center of the circle, and the oldest element used is pushed out. When you fill up the wheel with all 3 of the same element, that element gains a massive damage boost. You can only use each elemental ability once per fight though, so you have to think about what to use and when to use it. There is some preparation before battles, but once that's done, victory is then decided within the battles themselves. Grinding still isn't an issue, as you gain stat boosts automatically after each boss you defeat. The cornerstone of a fun turn-based RPG is having varied enough options and challenges that battles are decided by the actions taken within them, not by the numbers with which you enter them. It's also probably a good idea to cut down on the amount of time you have to spend grinding or nose-deep in overly complex menus. You can do these 2 things and make a wonderfully enjoyable game, but some people still don't care for turn-based systems at all. And that's okay, we all know there's no game for everyone. But that's not gonna stop developers from trying to make one. It's the unfortunate fact that you make the most money from appealing to the most people, not necessarily creating the best game you can for a smaller audience, that makes developers want to drag the turn-based formula further and further into the world of real time. They want the perfect hybrid, where the strategy and countless available actions of turn-based combat meet the fast, uninterrupted pace of real-time games halfway. But is something like Chrono Cross reducible? Can 3 or more characters with hundreds of abilities be used reliably by one person in real time? The answer is, of course not. What needs to happen then is that some control must be given up. Without giving up any control, the most you can hope for is something pseudo-real-time, like Final Fantasy XII. That game is essentially Final Fantasy's normal ATB system, only without the battle transitions. Growing up on Final Fantasy, you couldn't imagine how much quicker battles would go if you could just see enemies and fight them in the overworld, without having to go through a screen transition, a battle beginning, a battle ending, a reward screen, and the overworld loading back in every single time. It is a surprisingly good sweet spot between traditional RPGs and the hybrid attempts of later years, even if it wasn't exactly the kind of hybrid the developers were looking for. 12 still wasn't fast-paced enough for them, although I do think it's pretty much the fastest you can make a game go while still having as many options as older RPGs had. It even had a gambit system that let you program your party members' courses of action, a battle speed running from 1 to 6, and an active mode that made time still pass as you were selecting commands, for those that wanted to go even faster. If you want a game to play out faster than this still, though, you have to enter the domain of the hybrids. Hybrid RPGs, or action RPGs as they're sometimes called, have this big problem with control. They don't seem to know how much is too much, how much is too little, and how much is just right, if there even is a just right. You have games like Ni no Kuni, which expect you to cycle through a menu to defend and heal from attacks that are hitting you in real time, seemingly without breaks, all the while running around with full movement of your character for some reason. It's really overwhelming, and though it tries to be a new mix of turn-based and real-time combat, it ends up just being a mess. Then you get games that try too hard to make sure you're not overwhelmed, and completely neuter the gameplay. This fucker popped into your head, didn't it? For the sake of making fights more fast-paced, Final Fantasy XIII rended all control of the supporting characters from the player's hands. The most you could do was give them one of 6 possible roles to fill by switching between 6 pre-made combinations of these roles. You really didn't even have that much control over the lead character. As the game was so fast-paced, you were pigeonholed into just using the auto-battle function instead of cycling through commands and picking the abilities you want to use. Before long, battles are nothing but mashing X and switching between 6 ability sets for the characters to automatically use. It becomes less of actually playing the game and more of being a general overseer of characters' actions. Does it manage to streamline the traditional elements of a turn-based RPG into real time? Yes, but the lack of control you have really wears on you. The AI characters, as AI are wont to do, will fuck you over non-stop in this game. An AI-controlled medic does not understand that the boss has an attack that hits for 90% of your max HP. They might be programmed to heal the lead character at a higher percent than the other ones, but if a side character is at 10% HP, the medic will heal that one, while the 85% HP leader gets killed in one shot, causing you to lose even though you had a healer on duty like you should have had. There's also the classic cases of party members just sitting there like lumps on a log and not doing shit while the stagger gauge runs out. Even the character you control is incompetently designed for the combat, often with auto-battle not discriminating between magic and attacks to avoid the lower damaging one, like a human being would, if they were the one in control of selecting the attacks. As much fun as you can have switching between paradigms at just the right moment to maximize the stagger gauge and destroy the enemy, it's still over 2/3 of the game deciding things for you, and it shows after long enough. Square had 2 more cracks at this battle system before they finally put it to rest. The second game in the 13 trilogy made some advances to the system, like giving you the ability to switch party leaders in case the AI is being fucking stupid, or the ability to set paradigms as wide-ranging or more focused on a single enemy. Really though, these were trivial changes to the overall system, and didn't really get down and tear the ground from underneath the control problems the first game had. Lightning Returns, though, took the already streamlined mechanics of 13 and in a completely unprecedented turn of events, streamlined them further, and still gave the player more control in doing so. It was faster than 13, but somehow you still had more control over the elements of battle than in 13. A lot had to evolve in order to create this effect, especially the 6-role system. Out of the 4 roles dealing with the enemy, they were simplified into the 4 categories of command abilities in Lightning Returns. Commando became physical attacks like Spark Strike and Heavy Slash. Ravager became magic attacks like Firaga and Ultima. Saboteurs became simply the status ailment spells. And Sentinels became your guard abilities. These 4 ability types were able to be switched in and out to 3 ability sets with no limitations, allowing you to build your own roles as you see fit. You could be balanced, putting a magic, an attack, and guard in each set, or you could specialize, make an entirely physically built set, and a magic one, and then keep one to the side for defense and status ailments. The possibilities are endless, but with all that, where do the medic and synergist roles come in? In items. Items which are used in a paused menu. This way, with all 6 roles being balanced to the actions of one character, both healing animations and AI finally have no way to fuck you over. Add to that, Lightning Returns tried to fix the problem of victory being decided before battles by introducing more real-time elements. Guards and perfect guards had to be executed in real time. The triple ATB system allowed you to attack specifically when you saw the opportunity to do so, and the stagger system was updated to encourage many attacks all in a short time span, rather than just chipping away at a percentage for 2 minutes every fight. Hell, some stagger points were even reached automatically by fulfilling certain actions, like perfect guarding a certain attack, which gave you even more things to keep your attention from fight to fight, almost like a Paper Mario game would. Really, I think the battle system of Lightning Returns was fucking brilliant. It sounds complex, but that's just it. It's not even complicated. It's just mapping abilities to buttons, and switching between 3 sets of those mapped abilities. Like shortcuts in Kingdom Hearts almost. And honestly, it's a shame. It's a shame that few people will ever know what a good battle system Lightning Returns had, because of how shitty and underwhelming the rest of the game was. So while the Lightning Returns battle system was the perfect hybrid to me personally, I'm sure everyone else would be looking for a game that's a little more playable. There's one series I've been waiting to talk about until the end, mostly because it's relatively new and doesn't have any fully turn-based entries to speak of. A good example of a series that strikes a near-perfect balance between turn-based and real-time combat is the Xenoblade Chronicles series. In the first game of 2, both normal attacks and party members were automatically handled by the game, and yet the player still feels in control of battles. It works like this because the things delegated to the AI are not the important things that the tide of battle rests upon. Instead, you have typically around 10 abilities called arts that your lead character can use, all lined up in a clear row at the bottom of the screen. These are the main damage dealers of battle, and your success largely depends on using them correctly. Some arts deal more damage if you're behind the enemy, some deal status effects if you're on the enemy's side, and then you have what I call the stun lock chain. You have the status effect Break, which is very easy to inflict, but does nothing by itself. Next, you have Topple, which typically can only be inflicted when Break is already on an enemy, giving you an order in which to use arts. Later arts put Daze on toppled enemies and instant death on dazed enemies, leading into the next thing making this battle system, chain attacks. I hardly ever used the suicidal things, but they allowed you to string arts together, one after another, for increased damage or multiple consecutive status effects. When this all comes together, the main reason Xenoblade Chronicles is a great combination of turn-based and real-time elements is that it automates all the unimportant tasks and puts all the important actions in the simple, direct control of the player. It gives you so much to do in battles that's more important than normal attacking. It feels expected for you to not have to tell party members to individually attack every single time. Still without feeling like you've given up control of them like in Final Fantasy XIII. It occupies you with an addictive collection of small, simple tasks, like using an art behind an enemy or finishing a break topple chain, all of which are very rewarding on the short term and keep you on your toes throughout even the longest fights. This was a brilliant shot at a hybrid RPG, though it did have some flaws. In its sequel, Xenoblade Chronicles X, many of these missteps are fixed, and even some good things are improved upon further. The arts from the last game now have a second cooldown, so if you wait for them to charge up a second time, you can have more than double their effects. Different arts are charged up past the first cooldown on different weapons, giving you reason to switch between your ranged or melee weapons. On top of all this, chain attacks were replaced by Overdrive, which is a short, super-powered mode where arts charge up a third time around and charge up extremely fast, letting you deal unfathomable damage as a last resort. Xenoblade X took what was strong about the first game, the arts, and expanded upon them greatly. But just choosing between 10 or less abilities in a fight could at times seem like you were out of control of the fight. It seemed like sometimes there wasn't much you could do to assure victory besides keep using the same abilities. But the second game gave the player a lot more to take control over. Although more micromanagement could seem like an unnecessary annoyance, it's used well here because it goes towards a sense of greater control over the battle. Another great addition to the art system is the introduction of soul voices. In the first game, if you didn't have a healing ability equipped to a party member, there was no way to regain HP in battle. No items, nothing, besides the few healing arts that some characters had. So, in tougher fights, if you didn't have Sharla the healer in your party, it felt like you couldn't breathe. If the first game felt boring to you at times, this may have been why. The game offered so few ways to regain health. I can't imagine people getting very far without a party that involves either Sharla or Riki. There was some value to going with an all-offensive party of Shulk, Rhine, and Dunban, but get into a huge boss fight or a fight with multiple tough enemies, and Shulk's shitty healing ability just won't be able to cut it. In Xenoblade X, party members randomly shout out requests called soul voices, along the lines of, use melee attacks, use ranged attacks, use defensive attacks. If you have one of the arts they're talking about, using it will cause the entire party to regain a small amount of health. This way you can use any party you want and still have a way to regain health. You can have a healer in the party, or you can just say fuck it and go with 4 tanks. All it took was a simple addition of healing bonuses to arts, and it managed to fix one of the original Xenoblade's biggest weaknesses. Now, if you've played the original Xenoblade Chronicles, you know, improving on that game is a really incredible feat. With more control being given to the player, and more strategies being feasible due to the abundance of heals in any fight, if I wanted to call any game a perfect hybridization of real-time and turn-based combat, I'd say it was Xenoblade Chronicles X. Lightning Returns is an honorable mention, I guess. It has the battle system of a perfect hybrid, but the rest of the game is a train wreck every 30th of a second for 100 hours straight. I'll have a video on that later. For me, though, what I'd call a perfect hybrid is a turn-based real-time mix that hits that perfect sweet spot of control, where you don't have so much to do in so little time you're overwhelmed, but also where you have enough to do that it doesn't seem like the game is running on autopilot. I don't think it's easy to get a game in that region, especially when the sweet spot of control is still a very subjective thing. So what do you think? Do you have a different idea of what constitutes a good or perfect hybrid? Or another game you would call one? Do you think it's all bullshit and games were fine to remain as either turn-based or real-time? Let me know what you think in the comments.